I've been through many different containers that I keep my hair cutting supplies in. This is my most recent addition to the pack. I used to use Tupperware containers. I've also used the original containers that things have come in, like the clippers and the combs and stuff, but those all seem to fizzle out with time. This so far has been my best solution. These are cases that are made for speakers and for like little Bluetooth speakers, but for me they actually work really nice because they're not hard in that they won't close if it's a tight fit if you put different things in it. So I used the first one for the scissors, for the trimmers, and for these brushes. And then I used the second one for all of my accessories and supplies like the battery chargers and the additional combs. One last thing that I'll say is that these comb guards, I have bought proper wall guards from Wall, and thinking that they were going to be better than the ones that come, the cheap ones that come with your trimmer. And the funny thing is that some of the Wall ones are actually worse. They don't stay on the trimmer as well as the cheap ones do. So the main trimmer I've been using lately is this one, Nursing Artifact 2600. It's wireless, it's very cheap. The fact that it's wireless and holds a charge for a long time is what leads me to keep using this as opposed to another one that would plug in. For finer details, I use the Kemei. It's also very cheap, but it has a pretty close shave and it's very easy to use. When I put the more expensive Wall guard trimmers onto this trimmer, a lot of times, especially if it's like a 1, a half, or a quarter size, or a 1 1/2, the really small ones, they will come off a lot because they just somehow don't fit. But the cheap ones that came with this, or that came with my other ones, they stay on a lot more firmly and they never come off, especially on the lower numbers. And that's the main reason why I've chosen this assortment right here of combs to use or of guards to use, because they don't come off. All right, it is time for Michael's haircut. We are going to do a faded to a shaved look on the sides and on the back, and we're going to leave the top as is. This is a hairstyle that Michael's been sporting for a few years now. It's taken a long time to get this long. It is kind of reminiscent of the Vikings look. We've had different iterations that we've done since we've started this hairstyle. So we probably started like a couple years ago around here. We eventually worked our way up, and now we're all the way up here. It's kind of like a Mohawk. It's not as tight as some Mohawk hairstyles would be. Because Michael has had this haircut for so long, it doesn't really take us a long time to do it. One thing that we have spent a little bit more time on lately is working on the fade. The tricky thing about the fade is getting it to look like there is no distinction between one length and another length. The shortest length is always going to be on the bottom, and as we work our way to the top, we're probably going to get to a 1 1/2 or a 2 maybe up here. So I'm going to start by finding out how long that top part is. So I have a 2 guard on the clippers, and we're just going to see if this takes anything off. It may not. The 2 guard is not taking anything off, so we know we're going to have to go shorter than that. So we're going to work our way down to a 1 1/2 and see if we pick up any hair towards the top. All right, so now we are picking up hair. That means 1 1/2 is going to be the longest. So we'll go all the way to the top with the 1 1/2. The biggest challenge of this hairstyle for me has been to stay consistent with this line, keep it really straight. It's always easy to get a few hairs caught into the comb and then accidentally take them off, and you don't want to do that. So what I found that works the best is to use my hand and to really mat down in a tight way the longer hair to keep it out of the way of the combs catching it. If you do that tight enough, there's no reason why the comb should catch it if this hair up here is long enough to stay out of the way. Of course, the other challenge in this case is, as you can see, instead of just going around the top with this line, we've actually continued a Mohawk that goes down here, and that adds a little bit of a challenge in keeping the line straight going down. So the line is going to go across and then down. So as I get close to where that line is, I'm going to slow my hands down a little bit so that I don't make a mistake and take anything off that we've been working on growing. All right, as we make our way to the back, you can see that there's a lot of hair that has been included into this back portion here that doesn't really belong there. It's not long enough to join the other longer hair. So I'm gonna do some refining of this line. So Michael, does this feel like it's tugging on you at all, or that it's pulling? Now, one thing that's always the case on these using trimmers around the ears is the ears are not an easy area. Like this area is very easy. Everything gets caught in the comb. Around the ear, for some reason, as you're coming around the sides, it just doesn't catch the hair the same way. You do have to handle that ear by pulling it back. And sometimes I have to come in with a pair of scissors to do the fine trimming of the loose hairs that have escaped that comb. I've never been a fan of using the left and right comb guards on these. It just seems like those are a determined size or length, and they don't work for shorter haircuts the same as the length that they're intended for. So I don't use those. Right now, this back part is much wider at the top than it's supposed to be. It should be closer to that. So I always like going slower on these areas than faster, and that's why I haven't taken anything off. But now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the comb guard off of the trimmer, and I'm gonna use the bare edge of the trimmer to define this line and fix it up to where it's supposed to be. We're gonna start at the top and then work our way down. At the bottom, I like it. It's about the right width for the most part, but as we get up to the top, it's just too wide out here. You can tell that this hair has managed to join in, and it doesn't really belong in this patch. So very carefully, I'm going to define where that line should be by using the bare edge of the trimmer with no comb guard on it. You might be wondering, is that going to be shorter than the hair that's next to it? The answer is maybe, probably a tiny bit, but because I'm not going too far in and I'm not joining the rest of the hair's length, I don't believe it's going to be noticeable, and we'll find out in just a minute. But you see now we have a distinct line, and it's much neater than it used to be. So I'm going to put the 1.5 guard back on, and I'm going to come and clean up all the other stuff that basically is left out of the Mohawk portion of this haircut now. All you do see is that there's a clean separation from the two, and now this line is going to stand out more like it's meant to. If you come straight, turn you this way, we'll take a straight look at it like so. So let's do the same thing to the other side and make sure that we're symmetrical. This side is much further overgrown than the other side was. So this is going to be a much more drastic job that I'm doing here. When we run the faded hairstyle that we're going to do to finish this haircut up, it's going to blend everything in very nice and neat. All right, so now we have a much more even look on both sides. I'm going to work my way all the way down to the nape of the neck with this line.
Usually it's a little hot.
It's a little warm.
Yeah,
sorry. This trimmer, as good as it is, it gets really hot after a little while of usage. So if you take the comb off, the comb guards, this can get hot and sometimes needs to just cool down for a minute before you have it touch someone's head. With the comb guards on it, of course, there's no heat because that plastic is protecting the scalp from the heat. So now that we've created the line, I'm going to use my thumb and my hand here to separate the long hair from the short. And I'm going to come up and take off everything that needs to be taken off. All right, let's take a look and compare these two sides now and see if we're happy. Now, in my opinion, it's still a little wide up here, but it's better to be too wide than to be too thin because you can't undo that. And we've talked about this in the past. Michael prefers it a little bit wider up here, and he doesn't mind if it gets thin as it gets to the bottom. Is that right, Michael?
Right.
So I think we're gonna stick with this width for now. It's a little bit on the wide side if we're going for a complete mohawk, but in some ways we're experimenting with this hairstyle and finding out what works for Michael's head shape and type as we go. And he does prefer it to be a little bit wide up here. So if he changes his mind, this is very easy to thin out and make a thinner line here. But for the time being, this is how he likes it. And what I was doing is I was just making sure that we were exactly the same on both sides. That is a challenge, especially when there are cusps in the hair, in the head. And most people do have a cusp somewhere up in this area. And when those cusps get involved with these straight lines that you're trying to achieve, it's just all the more challenging. When it comes to these kinds of styles, of course, it's all about making straight lines and making sure that the left side matches the right side. And I believe we've achieved that here with this first part of the cut. All that we have left to do now is to fade. Do a little bit of fading here as we work our way up.